Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from? Let's see which city shows up the most. They came without warning. Not a knock, not a call. Just 3 men in uniform standing at my doorstep, arms crossed, their eyes scanning the house like I'd done something wrong. I opened the door, calm but cautious. They weren't police, though they sure acted like it. Their badges read Community Safety Officer. The type you usually see cruising around a gated neighborhood trying to look official. But their tone wasn't casual. It was firm. Too firm. "We need to talk about the firearms in your home," the one in the middle said. I paused for a second. Firearms? This wasn't a police investigation. They weren't detectives. These were HOA security guards. And they weren't asking. They were telling. "There have been complaints," he continued. "This community has strict rules. No firearms allowed. Especially not shotguns." I almost laughed, not because it was funny but because of how ridiculous it sounded. This was my home. My legally owned firearms were locked up, secured, and registered. Everything was in line. And yet here I was, being told by security officers from the Homeowners Association that I was somehow in violation of community policy. I asked him where this complaint came from. "Doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is that you're in violation. We're going to need to take possession of the firearms for community safety." And just like that, my blood ran cold. Take possession? I looked at the 3 of them, standing like they had authority. Like they were real cops. But they weren't. Not even close. They didn't have a warrant. They had no legal standing. Yet they were talking about taking my legally owned shotguns like it was part of their job. I told them no. Plain and simple. "You're not taking anything from my home." They exchanged glances. One of them reached for his radio. The tension started rising fast. "We can escalate this," one of them said. "If you don't cooperate, we can involve law enforcement. You're breaching community safety standards." I stared at them for a second. There was something deeply wrong here. This wasn't about community safety. This was about control. About someone in the neighborhood who didn't like the idea of a law-abiding man owning firearms, even though I had every right to. And they didn't know who they were talking to. I told them I was federally protected under LEOSA, the Law Enforcement Officers Safety Act. I served for years in law enforcement. I earned the right to carry under federal law regardless of local or state rules. That includes retired officers. That includes me. They looked confused. A moment of hesitation passed between them. Then the one in the middle squared up and said, "That doesn't apply here. This is a private community." That's when I knew they were in way over their heads. I asked them again if they had a warrant. They didn't answer. I asked if they were acting under any legal authority. Still nothing. So I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. Calm but firm. I wasn't letting anyone in. Not like this. I told them if they took another step toward my property, I'd call the sheriff. Not to intimidate them, but because that's what you do when someone is trying to violate your rights under the color of authority. And you could see it. That flicker in their eyes. The look people get when they suddenly realize they've made a mistake. A big one. But it didn't end there. The next day, I received a notice taped to my door. From the HOA board. It said I was non-compliant, and that legal action would be pursued if I failed to remove the firearms from my home within 48 hours. No hearing. No due process. Just a demand. As if the federal law didn't exist. As if my background didn't matter. As if I was a threat. They didn't just want my guns gone. They wanted to make an example out of me. What they didn't know was I've dealt with this kind of pressure before. I've been on the other side of doors like mine. I've had to enforce real laws. And I know exactly how the legal system works when someone abuses power. But this felt different. This was personal. This was my home. My life. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, I faced far worse, but because I knew where this was going. These weren't just overzealous security officers. This was a coordinated move. Someone on the board had a problem with me. Maybe it was about my guns. Maybe it was just politics. I didn't know. But I knew I wasn't going to back down. The next morning, I went to the sheriff's department and filed a report. I laid everything out. The attempted seizure. The false claim of authority. The harassment. They listened carefully. Took it seriously. Because unlike those HOA officers, the sheriff knew the law. Knew what LEOSA meant. Knew what a violation of civil rights looked like. Back home, the community buzz had already started. Neighbors who never spoke to me were suddenly curious. Some were supportive. Others gave me the cold shoulder. The word had gotten around, the guy in Unit 14B has guns and the HOA is cracking down. I didn't care about the gossip. I cared about the principle. Then came the email. A formal notice from the HOA's legal team, doubling down on their claim that firearms were prohibited. No mention of federal law. No consideration of my background. Just threats, fines, legal fees, even eviction if I failed to comply. That's when I called my attorney. He didn't just laugh, he nearly fell out of his chair. "They've got nothing," he said. "They're trying to play cop and they're about to get burned." We started preparing everything. The documentation, the statute, the timeline, my law enforcement credentials, the report to the sheriff. It was all there, clear as day. But the most powerful piece? The fact that they tried to enter my home. That they tried to seize private property without any legal authority. That they targeted me not for what I did but for who I was. And let me tell you, that kind of abuse? It doesn't go unnoticed in court. Still, the pressure didn't stop. They began escalating things in other ways. Petty violations. Noise complaints that didn't exist. Parking citations on days I hadn't even left the house. It became obvious, they were trying to push me out. To make my life miserable. To send a message. But every time they pushed, I pushed back harder. I documented everything. Every notice. Every conversation. Every violation of due process. Because that's what you do when you've been trained to uphold the law. You fight back with facts. With proof. With calm, methodical truth. I wasn't angry. I was focused. People think situations like this are rare. That they only happen to loud, aggressive types. But they don't. They happen quietly. Subtly. One rule at a time. One abuse at a time. Until suddenly you're standing in your own home, being told you don't have the right to defend yourself. That's when it hits you. This isn't just about HOA policies. This is about power. About control. About someone deciding that their fear is more important than your freedom. And that's why I wasn't backing down. Because if I let them do this to me, someone trained, someone protected, someone who knows the law, then what happens to the next person? The single mom? The veteran? The retiree who just wants peace? They crossed a line. And they were about to learn what happens when you cross it. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The day I walked into my attorney's office with a folder full of documents, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was standing up to something much bigger. Something that hides behind rules and titles. People assume HOA boards are harmless, a group of neighbors just trying to keep things tidy. But when they use their position to intimidate and control, that's not harmless. That's dangerous. He flipped through the papers slowly. My police ID. My LEOSA certification. The HOA's notice. The false accusations. Every detail carefully logged. "This isn't just harassment," he said, "it's a civil rights issue." And I knew he was right. Most people don't understand what LEOSA really means. The Law Enforcement Officers Safety Act was passed for a reason, to ensure that retired and active officers can carry firearms for protection, no matter where they are in the country. It's not a suggestion. It's federal law. If you've served and you meet the qualifications, your right to carry doesn't disappear just because someone behind a desk feels uncomfortable. I had done my part. I put in my years, risked my life, earned that right. And now, a handful of HOA board members, people with no legal training, no law enforcement experience, were trying to strip it away with nothing more than a letterhead and a bad attitude. It wasn't going to work. But they didn't stop. They doubled down. Days after the notice, I received another warning. This time it included fines. They were billing me $250 a day for non-compliance with community safety regulations. No legal citation. No specific clause. Just vague threats wrapped in official-sounding language. It was intimidation, plain and simple. My attorney drafted a response. A formal cease and desist. It laid out the law in clear terms. LEOSA preempts local restrictions. It reminded them that HOA rules do not override federal statutes. It pointed out that their security officers had no authority to enter private property or seize firearms. We sent it via email. Certified mail. Hand-delivered a copy to their office. No one responded. Not a single word. And that silence spoke volumes. But behind that silence they were still moving. Quietly. Strategically. A neighbor I'd spoken with once in passing, someone who never had a problem before, suddenly claimed I'd threatened him. He filed a complaint with the board. Said he felt unsafe, knowing I had weapons in the house. That I'd bragged about them and implied I would use them if needed. It was a lie. 100% false. But it gave the board something to use. They called an emergency meeting. Not with me, without me. No due process. No chance to defend myself. I only found out because a sympathetic neighbor tipped me off. She overheard it from someone on the landscaping crew. They were trying to build a case. Not a legal one. A narrative. The dangerous guy with the guns. The one who wouldn't follow rules. The one making everyone feel unsafe. That's the thing about fear. It doesn't have to be real. Just believable enough to sway the right people. I stayed calm. Didn't confront anyone. Didn't lash out. That's what they wanted, a reaction. Something they could point to and say, see? He's unstable. But I wasn't giving them that satisfaction. Instead, I filed a formal complaint with the sheriff's office again. This time, not just about the security guards, but about the entire HOA board. Abuse of authority. Harassment. Retaliation. We included every document. Every false report. Every attempt to fine me into submission. And for the first time, something started to happen. A detective called me a few days later. He had questions. Serious ones. He'd reviewed the footage from a neighbor's door camera, the day the HOA security tried to enter my home. You could clearly hear them saying they would confiscate my weapons. That they didn't care about federal law. That they were acting on orders from above. It wasn't just overreach. It was a deliberate attempt to enforce power they didn't have. When the detective asked if I wanted to press charges, I didn't hesitate. Yes, because this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was targeted. Intentional. But even as the legal wheels started turning, the board still tried to fight back. They sent a letter to all residents. A general message about safety concerns and ongoing investigations. They didn't name me, but everyone knew who it was about. They painted a picture of someone dangerous. Someone unpredictable. It stung. Not because I cared what people thought, I've learned to grow a thick skin, but because it was so dishonest. So cowardly. Hiding behind vague language and fear-mongering to turn neighbors against me. To isolate me. But here's the thing they didn't expect. I wasn't alone. More neighbors started coming forward. Quietly. Emails. Texts. A knock on the door here and there. Stories of how the board had overstepped with others too. Fining people for things that weren't violations. Threatening elderly residents over minor infractions. Using the HOA's rules as a weapon. And suddenly it wasn't just about my firearms anymore. It was about something that had been boiling beneath the surface for a long time. Control. That's what this has always been about. They didn't want to feel unsafe. They wanted to feel powerful. And the easiest way to do that was to find someone they could single out. Someone they could pressure. Someone who wouldn't bow to their authority. They picked the wrong guy. We filed a civil lawsuit next. Harassment. Violation of federal rights. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Abuse of process. Every legal angle laid out in detail. And because of Leosa, we had solid ground to stand on. The HOA tried to respond with more letters, more fines, more veiled threats. But every move they made just added fuel to the fire. Every notice became another piece of evidence. Every act of retaliation strengthened our case. And the best part? Their own actions betrayed them. One of the board members accidentally replied all to an internal email. It got forwarded to my attorney. In it, they openly discussed how to push him out and create enough pressure that he'll want to leave. There it was. In writing. Proof that this was never about safety. It was about forcing me to give up and walk away. But they underestimated one thing, how far I'm willing to go when I know I'm right. This isn't just legal for me. It's personal. Because I remember the oath I took. To protect and serve. To defend rights, not just my own but everyone's. I didn't stop believing in that just because I hung up the badge. It's a part of who I am. And if they thought I was going to surrender that just to make them feel powerful, they were in for a surprise. I kept everything. Recorded calls. Screenshots. Written complaints. The more they tried to crush me, the more they revealed about themselves. And slowly things started to shift. The detective reached out again. The county prosecutor was reviewing the case. There was enough for potential charges. And the board? They were suddenly quiet. No more warnings. No more fines. No more threats. But silence doesn't erase what they did. They tried to strip away my rights. They used their positions to bully and intimidate. And they thought they could get away with it because most people don't fight back. I'm not most people. And this story, it isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to every person who's been pushed around by a system pretending to protect them. Every homeowner told to stay silent. Every veteran who's had their service questioned. Every retired officer who's had to justify their rights to someone who never wore a uniform. They can write all the letters they want. They can draft as many fake rules as they need. but none of it will change the truth. The courtroom was quiet when we walked in. Not the silence of peace, the kind of silence that weighs heavy, thick with tension. You could feel it in the air. On one side of the room, the HOA board members sat stiff, trying to look confident. But their eyes told a different story. They didn't expect it to go this far. They never thought I'd actually fight back, let alone bring them to court. They thought a few fines would scare me off. That I'd fold under pressure. That they could throw around titles and clipboards and rules, until I backed down. But today they weren't in charge. Today the judge was. I sat beside my attorney, calm on the outside. Inside I was wired tight. Not nervous, focused. Because this wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about exposing them. Showing everyone what really happens when a group of people with too much power and not enough accountability decide to play cops in a neighborhood. The first thing the judge asked was simple. Do the defendants understand the federal protections under LEOSA? You should have seen their attorney squirm. He stumbled, tried to change the subject, even suggested that community rules might override personal rights. My attorney didn't let it slide. Your Honor, he said firm and clear, federal law is not optional. These individuals attempted to override a federal statute with nothing more than HOA bylaws. They used intimidation tactics, threats of property seizure and coordinated harassment, all under the false belief that their authority superseded the Constitution. The judge looked over his glasses. And did they enter the plaintiff's property without consent? That was the moment everything cracked. Because the board's own security footage, the one they stupidly submitted as part of their evidence, showed exactly that. 3 security guards, no warrant, standing at my door talking about taking my firearms for safety. They tried to spin it. Said they were acting proactively. Said someone in the community was afraid. That they had a duty to act. But fear doesn't give you power. And their fear, whether real or manufactured, was never a reason to trample someone's rights. Witnesses were called next. One by one, neighbors stood up and told their stories. It wasn't just about me anymore. A woman talked about getting fined for a flower pot that was too bright. An older man explained how he was threatened with legal action over his American flag being too large. A young couple shared how they'd been harassed for leaving their car in the driveway for more than 12 hours. It was a pattern. Abuse of power. Using rules like weapons. And when my turn came, I told the truth. I told them about the day the guards came. The way they stood at my door, hands on their radios like they were about to call in backup. The way they tried to enter without cause, without a warrant. How they brushed off my federal ID like it meant nothing. I told them about the letters, the fonts, the fake violations, the smear campaign behind my back. And I didn't raise my voice once. Because I didn't need to. The facts did the talking. They didn't intimidate me. But they wanted to. And that matters. You could see the shift in the room. The judge. The spectators. Even some of the board members were starting to look uneasy. They weren't in control anymore. They couldn't hide behind forms and policy letters. My lawyer laid it out in plain language. They attempted to seize federally protected property without cause. They impersonated authority. They retaliated when he stood up for his rights. This wasn't enforcement. This was harassment. It was more than just words. We had screenshots of emails between board members, discussing how to make him leave. One even joked that maybe he'd crack, if they fined him enough. They laughed about weaponizing fear. Turned a law-abiding citizen into a target. And now they were being held accountable. But even with all the evidence stacked against them, they still tried to act like victims. Their attorney stood up, voice trembling slightly, and claimed they were just trying to keep the community safe. Safe from what? From a man with a spotless record? From a decorated officer with years of service? From someone whose only crime was knowing the law and refusing to be bullied? That's the part that stung the most, being treated like a threat in the very place I called home. As if the years I spent protecting others didn't matter. As if my rights were negotiable. They weren't. By the end of the day, the judge had heard enough. No final decision yet, that would come later. But you could tell just by the look in his eyes where things were leaning. The board members didn't make eye contact as they left. No more smug looks. No confident smiles. Just the quiet shuffle of people who'd finally realized they'd gone too far. But the battle wasn't just in court. Back home things had changed. Some neighbors avoided me. Wouldn't meet my eyes. Others, the quiet ones, nodded silently in passing. A few even thanked me, said they'd wanted to stand up too but didn't know how. They didn't have the background, the protection, the knowledge, but now they had an example. Not a hero. Just someone who refused to let fear win. And the board? They were unraveling fast. 2 members resigned before the week was over. Another was hit with a personal lawsuit, defamation. All of them were named in the civil suit. They thought they could hide behind their titles. They were wrong. Even the security company that hired those guards sent a formal apology. Claimed the guards had acted independently. Said they'd be retraining their staff. You could tell they were trying to cover themselves, but the damage was done. You can't unring that bell. More news started spreading. A local reporter got wind of the case. Wanted an interview. I declined for now. This wasn't about making headlines. It was about sending a message. That message was simple: know your rights. Stand your ground. Because bullies don't always wear masks. Sometimes they wear polos with name tags. Sit on neighborhood boards. Smile to your face while writing up violations behind your back. The worst part? It almost worked. If I hadn't known the law. If I hadn't had the experience. If I'd gotten angry instead of organized, they might have won. They could have walked into my home, taken what was mine, and made me look like the problem. But they didn't expect someone who fought back with facts. With documents. With the law on their side. They expected fear. What they got was resistance. And that resistance? It wasn't just mine. It came from every person who reached out, every neighbor who spoke up, every stranger online who said, "Thank you for not backing down." Because this isn't just my story. It's the story of anyone who's ever been cornered by authority misused. Anyone who's been told to shut up, sit down, and obey without question. Anyone who's watched their rights shrink because someone else decided they didn't deserve them. They thought they could break me. What they did was prove exactly why I won't be broken. And I'm not finished. Not until every letter of the law is honored. Not until every abuse is accounted for. Not until every person on that board learns what accountability looks like. This fight is just getting started.